This week on Jerusalem Dateline, political crisis.
I will not tolerate an opposition within the government anymore.
Benjamin Netanyahu shakes up his cabinet and calls for early elections. Plus, Iran's ugly goals, why the Islamic Republic is a greater threat than ever, and the app that's bringing biblical archaeology to life for kids everywhere. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell, coming to you this week from Jerusalem's Old City with the Western Wall and the Temple Mount behind me. It's a special day for many young Jewish boys who are having the bar mitzvah. We begin this week with a major shakeup in Israel. The government has collapsed and early elections are planned for next spring. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has fired 2 of his ministers. And as Julie Stahl reports, the early elections will plunge Israel into a bitter campaign.
In a televised address, Netanyahu accused 2 of his ministers of staging a government takeover. He told Israelis he couldn't run a government that was criticizing him and his policies.
I will not tolerate an opposition within the government anymore. I will not tolerate ministers attacking government policy from within the government, attacking its leader, motivated by political interests, and being irresponsible at a national level.
How to deal with growing Palestinian terrorism, building in Jerusalem, increasing concern over Iran's nuclear development, and a law to enshrine Israel's Jewish character created divisions within the government. Israelis will vote in elections in mid-March, 2 years ahead of schedule. TV opinion polls show the country veering to the right and bolstering Netanyahu's Likud party, but a lot could happen in the next 3 months. In Brussels, Secretary of State John Kerry declined to comment on internal Israeli politics.
We hope that whatever government is formed can negotiate and move towards resolving the differences between Israelis and Palestinians.
For now, Israel will plunge into a costly election campaign that may not bring the country any closer to solving the issues it's facing. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
The political crisis has more to do than just national security ideas or leadership styles. A big part of it has to do with a bill before the Knesset that's divided both the leadership and the country. Professor Abraham Diskin helped draft the legislation. He says the law is simple.
It's a declaratory law that talks about the fact that Israel is a Jewish nation, that the flag is the flag that we already have. The anthem is the same anthem.
The purpose of the law is to defend things that already exist. It doesn't create a single new policy.
Yoram Hazony, president of the Herzl Institute, says with the current state of the Middle East, Israel needs to maintain its Jewish nature, while at the same time being a robust democracy.
This is a law that seeks to defend the existing Jewish school system, the law of return, the right of the Israeli government to employ Israeli armed forces for the sake of the defense of Jewish people everywhere in the world rather than only for Israeli citizens. That's not a change in the status quo, that's defending the status quo.
Hazony and Diskin say the law preserves the individual rights of all Israelis, regardless of race or religion. Yet given the current political crisis, it's unlikely the law will be voted on soon. Early elections seem more likely. If so, recent polls suggest Benjamin Netanyahu would return as prime minister for a 4th term. Joining me to talk more about the Jewish state law, the early elections, and the current situation is Julie Stahl. Julie, what role did the legislation have in bringing about the new elections?
You know, Chris, it was probably more like the straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't certainly the only issue that brought about elections, but it was probably the last straw for some of the parties. The Likud party looks like it would definitely come out the winner, but the winner will still have to work with other parties to get a majority, and that's where the Israeli political system gets a little bit sticky, a little complicated. He'll have to make deals with other parties. Looks like the country will go more towards the right.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. The polls are the country shifting to the right, so they'll have Likud, which is a right or conservative party, and then Yisrael Beiteinu, and not to get into too many of the politics, but generally, do you sense the country heading that direction?
It seems that way. It seems like one of the issues that was always left-right issue was about the peace talks. And I think Israelis are pretty much fed up with the whole idea of quote-unquote peace talks with the Palestinians that really have yielded no fruit. We've reported that there's another outbreak of violence now. You know, they've had a few wars with various factions in Gaza, and I think Israelis are pretty much tired of the whole thing.
We're here with the Temple Mount in the background. You were there just yesterday. What role is the issue, the controversy over the Temple Mount having to do with the current situation?
It's definitely the center of attention. You know, the Palestinians are saying that the Israelis are trying to permit Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount, and they're trying to take over the Temple Mount. It's simply not true. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said many times that, you know, that Israel has no desire to change the status quo, which does not allow any other religion except Muslims to pray up there. Yesterday when I was up there were different groups of people who reportedly they're paid by Hamas, and just screaming at visitors up there that Allah is great. And yeah, it's a little bit annoying.
But there is a movement, you've done a story on this, the Haliba movement, which wants to allow Jews or non-Muslims, that would include Christians, to be able to pray up there on the Temple Mount. Do you see that movement increasing?
It's definitely increasing. I think just Israelis, that's part of the whole thing. They realize it's their heritage. That Temple Mount, that's where their temples were. They want to pray up there. They want the right to pray up there. I don't know how many Israelis would even actually go up there and pray. They certainly don't want to take over the mosques. One of the things is that when Orthodox Jews go up there, first of all, they have to be escorted by policemen. They're not allowed to take prayer books up there. And they only walk around the perimeter. They don't even come near the mosques or even the center compound because they don't want to defile the holy place.
And I know they see this much as a human rights issue, that this is a holy place for the Jewish people. They should have the right to pray up there. And I'm sure we're going to see more. That's going to be more and more the center of controversy as time goes on. Well, Julie, thank you. Earlier this week, the French Parliament passed a non-binding symbolic resolution recognizing a Palestinian state. It's part of a wave of European countries recognizing Palestine. But on the other side of the ocean, the U.S. Congress is close to passing a bill recognizing Israel as a major strategic partner. As Gary Lane reports, it's part of a bill aimed at drawing the two countries closer together.
The U.S.-Israel Strategic Partnership Act, approved this week by the U.S. Congress, is viewed as historic because it strengthens the friendship the two nations have enjoyed for nearly 70 years. The landmark legislation expands cooperation in several areas like energy and agriculture, defense and intelligence. It provides Israel with another $200 million worth of military equipment, a weapons stockpile both nations can use in the event of war. Israel's status will be upgraded to expedite trade licensing, and Israeli citizens may be allowed to enter the USA without a visa. Congressional approval comes at a time when relations between the two countries are at an all-time low. Obama administration officials have made disparaging remarks about Benjamin Netanyahu. White House dislike of the Israeli prime minister is apparent, and many Israelis feel the United States is pressuring Israel to accept further concessions with Hamas, a designated terror group that has pledged to destroy the Jewish state. Natan Sharansky of the Jewish Agency for Israel told CBN News he believes the U.S. will remain friends with Israel because the nation is the only representative of the free world in the Middle East.
That's why inevitably we have and will continue to have strong cooperation between America and Israel. And I have to say that our security cooperation, the cooperation at the level of our armies and our intelligence is very close and very deep.
Sharansky says what is most important to Israel is that America continues to lead the free world.
And when America is not ready to lead, we all have problems.
But some of Sharansky's fellow Likud party members and some members of Congress don't like the direction the Obama administration is leading, especially on the issue of Iran's nuclear program. They believe the United States will eventually negotiate an agreement that will lead to Iranian development of nuclear weapons. That's something Sharansky says Israel will never accept.
Of course, we prefer that the free world will realize the depth of the threat to freedom in the world and will take care of Iran. But if the free world will not do it, Israel will have no choice but to deal with this problem.
And while many see the historic partnership as a step in the right direction, deep strains in the friendship may lie ahead. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Up next, the threat from Iran. Our discussion with an expert on the Islamic Republic and its dangerous ambitions. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. The Islamic Republic of Iran is one of the most dangerous countries on the face of the earth. It supports international terrorism and is pursuing a nuclear weapon. Mark Dubovitz of the Foundation of the Defense of Democracies is an expert on Iran. CBN senior international correspondent George Thomas spoke with him about the rogue nation in our CBN newsroom.
You know, Iran has been working on this nuclear weapon for 12 years now. Are we at the point of, that these negotiations are pretty much useless?
Well, it's certainly starting to appear that way, George. I mean, the Iranians have been playing us for decades. They've been working on this nuclear program. They've been lying about it. They've been deceiving the international community. And they've been using negotiations as a way to advance their nuclear program and actually relieve the sanctions pressure. Mm-hmm. The United States, our response has been to continue to give them more and more nuclear concessions. And I think all of this is doing is it's hardening their nuclear intransigence as they continue to move their nuclear program in some very, very disturbing ways.
Do you get a sense that with the new Congress sworn in next month that anything will change, or are we dealing with the status quo?
Certainly, the president has made it very clear that he's going to veto any legislation that comes out of Congress. I mean, remember, Congress actually imposed the toughest sanctions against Iran over the president's objections. And these are the sanctions that got Iran to the negotiating table in the first place. So Congress is saying...
And do they continue to bite? Do they continue to affect the Iranian economy?
Well, they do, except Iran's economy last year was on its back. Now it's on its knees getting up to its feet. And so the economic pressure is coming off. The economy is not booming in Iran, but they're not facing the kind of economic imminent collapse that they faced last year. So they don't have the incentive anymore to actually compromise. And that's the problem, and that's what Congress is trying to address.
And I'm sure it doesn't help when Iran continues to make these lucrative deals with, for example, Russia and China on the side.
Well, that's exactly right, because Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has said repeatedly to his people, I have a plan B. My plan B is I'm going to escape from Western sanctions by doing deals with the Russians and with the Chinese and with the Turks, and I'm going to get billions of dollars of their money pouring into my economy so I don't have to compromise with the West.
How far, in your assessment, do you think Iran's nuclear program is today?
So the various elements of Iran's nuclear program, their ability to enrich uranium, which is an essential element to build a nuclear weapon. We know today they're only about 2.5 months away from breakout, which is the amount of time it takes to weaponize the uranium. They also need a delivery vehicle, which is a long-range ballistic missile. We know they're working on an intercontinental ballistic missile, which we think they may have by 2015 or 2016. That has our address on it. That's directed at the United States of America. But the missing element is their nuclear warhead. We don't know whether they're continuing to work on their warhead, where they're working on their warhead, because we have no ability to go in there and find out. And they've been stonewalling the international community for decades.
You've written about what you call Iran's golden loophole. Explain that.
Well, at the time, Iran's golden loophole was this loophole in U.S. sanctions that allowed Iran to sell energy to the Turks and in exchange get gold. So literally billions of dollars of gold was leaving Turkey to Iran, and the Iranians were taking that gold and they were using it to replenish their foreign exchange reserves. That gas for gold, as it was called, turned into a $100 billion plus massive corruption scandal that implicated some of the top ministers of Turkey's government, including the Prime Minister Erdogan's son. And so it was a massive corruption scandal, but it also showed that the Iranians are ingenious at sanctions busting and getting around Western strictures.
One country that continues to keep a very close eye on Iran in this region is Israel. Is there a sense that the Obama administration is trying to curtail Israel's move because they see the immediate threat? It's an existential threat to them. How has the Obama administration handled Israel's concern about Iran's nuclear capabilities?
Well, President Obama has assured the Israelis for years that he's going to stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. And unfortunately, I think the president has also done everything he can to block Israel's ability to respond militarily to that threat. And it's actually undermined the president's own negotiating position, because today the supreme leader of Iran doesn't believe that President Obama will use military force, and he doesn't believe that Israel will use military force. So The military option's off the table. The economic leverage is off the table. There's no more coercion left. Now we're engaged in diplomacy with one of the hardest, most intransigent men in the world, and we have no leverage.
And these are guys who are willing to go on for years and years. Mark Dubowitz, thank you so much for your insights. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much, George.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, the seldom told story of the mass expulsion of Jews from the Middle East. Earlier this week, Israel commemorated the mass expulsion of Jews from Arab lands. You may not know it, but 10 Arab nations and Iran expelled hundreds of thousands of Jews after the rebirth of the State of Israel. But that story is rarely told. For thousands of years, Jewish communities thrived throughout the Middle East. But all that changed in 1948, when Muslim nations reacted violently to Israel's birth.
Jews of Middle Eastern and North African descent, almost 900,000 of these Jews were exiled forcibly from their homes throughout the Middle East and North Africa when the State of Israel was founded.
After the 1967 Six-Day War, another wave of persecution hit and forced most of the remaining Jews to leave 11 Middle Eastern and North African countries. Linda Munichen became one of those refugees.
Nobody would want anything with the Jews, especially with the incitement going on the radio, in the mosques. So we were labeled like the fifth column. Also, more constraints were put, like you couldn't take out from your own account from the bank more than 100 dinars a month.
In 1970, Munichen and her brother left Baghdad for Israel, keeping their flight secret from their father, a prominent lawyer.
We didn't even kiss goodbye because I thought we'll meet one day. Anyway, I had to run away through Iran.
They escaped into the unknown.
I was disguised like an Arab when I looked, and my brother bought a very old coat. It was very cold winter. And to our big luck, everything went smoothly because at the time Jews were not allowed to be away from home more than 80 or 100 kilometers.
Examples like this happen all across the Middle East. Expulsions, seizure of property, and murder of the Jews.
In the aftermath of the Six-Day War in 1967, the mob in Libya, especially in Tripoli and Benghazi, took to the streets and started burning the homes of Jewish people and ransacking our warehouses. And my father's warehouse was burned. And then they came along and started pouring gasoline around my house. And a Muslim neighbor came down from the building and convinced the mob that the Jewish family wasn't living there anymore. And of course, he saved our lives.
American Gina Waldman started Jamina, Jews indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa.
And I always felt that there was a sense of injustice, that even though we really made a good life for ourselves in whichever country hosted us, nonetheless, we were never recognized for the wrongs that were done to us.
Two-thirds of the Jewish refugees resettled in Israel and the rest in other Western countries. Waldman and Munichen both say they were traumatized. Munichen says there's a message for the Western world today.
850,000 Jews were expelled or forced to leave or persecuted from Arab countries. And when we try to overlook these issues, they come again in a different way. So now it's the turn of the Christians, who are being killed, shot, and we cannot see any effective action from the West.
For Israel, sharing the saga of Jewish refugees is part of gaining international recognition for their sufferings.
And we say, well, there are two sets of refugees. There are Jewish refugees and there are Arab refugees, and both sides should be compensated together.
Coming up, using modern technology to teach kids about ancient history. Welcome back. What do you get when you cross the Dead Sea Scrolls with today's digital age? You get an app that teaches kids in English about the oldest written record of the Bible. They call it DigQuest, a new app that introduces kids to archaeology with unique games featuring Israel's ancient treasures. The app brings the Bible to life for young kids through archaeology and incorporates the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is the conservation lab at the Israel Antiquities Authority, and this is the original scroll 2,000 years ago from the book of Genesis. And it says in Genesis 1:1, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And that's the first puzzle young users get to solve.
The kids are actually making a puzzle, 2,000-year-old fragments, some from the Bible, some sectarian. They were found in the Qumran caves in the 40s.
Ulrich Rosengarten of the Israel Antiquities Authority helped come up with the app.
We try and make an introduction for kids, connecting them to the subject, since we feel it's one of the most important discoveries of the 20th century.
It transforms iPhones or iPads into an archaeological tool, allowing players to get a feel of uncovering mysteries from the past.
You could be interested in archaeology, you could be interested in the Bible, Christian, Jewish.
Right now, 2 digs are based on real-life excavations, including the Dead Sea Scrolls found in Qumran.
The scrolls were found fragmentary, and the scholars have been working for years in order to put them together and try and read what's on it.
The app mimics real-life technology, such as spectral imaging, which brightens the script, making it easier to read. This process helped make the Dead Sea Scrolls available online.
So after you complete the puzzle, you could scan it and read the content much better. Whoever downloads the app gets a collection box, and he could add every item he completes into his collection box.
With the world speeding forward in the high-tech age, is archaeology still important? Rosengarten says yes.
It's our history. It's our legacy. It's our, if we don't learn from what we had, how would we progress today?
Well, it was quite exciting to be in the same room as the oldest known copy of the book of Genesis. Well, that's it for this edition. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.